Good afternoon. My name is Lori Shubin. I am the National Director for Enterprise Community Partners Resiliency and Disaster Recovery Program. Enterprise is the only national nonprofit that addresses America's affordable housing crisis from every angle, combining 40 years of experience, thousands of local partners, and the experience and expertise of over 1,100 employees nationwide. Enterprise works across the nation to preserve, protect, and produce housing and communities that are stepping stones to more, so that people not only make rent, they build futures. We are in 11 market offices, developing and deploying programs and support community organizations on the ground. We're advocating for policies on a nonpartisan basis at every level of government. We're investing capital to build and preserve rental homes people can afford. We're operating as owners, 13,000 affordable homes, and providing resident services for nearly 22,000 people. We're building programs and partnerships to drive and shape risk mitigation and resiliency for affordable housing to protect it from extreme weather risk and a changing climate. I want to welcome more than 1,800 attendees to today's special event as we join together with our partners, Fannie Mae, Bellwether Enterprise, and HUD on this very special partnership to build safe housing across the nation. Please place your, next please. Please place your questions in the Q&A function, and we will do our very best to answer those at the end of the discussion and throughout the event. And please feel free to all of our colleagues on the line in the Spanish channel to write the questions in Espanol as well. We are here to answer them and to be responsive. Next slide. So I would also like to know, we'd like to know, where are you calling from? If you can put in the chat where you're calling from, we would be most grateful. We've got callers coming in from Fort Myers, from Chicago, from Puerto Rico, from Washington, from England, from all over the country. We've got 50 states represented: Hawaii, Salt Lake City, Detroit, New York City, Miami, Cleveland. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. And if we could just make sure the chat is on, the chat function, that would be terrific. Great. Thank you so much, Germany. We're so happy to have you with us today. And as I said, we've got an incredible attendance from all over the country. So we also want to know, what is your affiliation? So we're going to host a poll right now that is going to help us understand who you are. So please feel free to fill this out. Are you owners? Are you operators of affordable housing, investors, community members, residents, regulators, government agencies, asset managers, underwriters? We've got an incredible assortment of sectors represented here. We've got a lot of owners, and we'll be sharing this poll with you all, government agencies. So just please continue to tell us where you're from, who you are. This is great. Thank you so much. Next slide, please. I am beyond honored to present to you luminaries of our time in affordable housing, community and economic development, risk management, and disaster recovery. We're going to be presenting to you the tool we're launching today, and then we're going to be moving into a discussion with our colleagues about climate risk and getting prepared. Priscilla Almodovar is the President and Chief Executive Officer of Enterprise Community Partners. Under her leadership, Enterprise has set forward a new 5-year strategic vision that aims to strengthen our longstanding commitment to healthy communities through groundbreaking programs, racial equity initiatives, and industry-leading impact investment tools and resources tailored to communities across the nation. Priscilla joined Enterprise from JP Morgan Chase, where as managing director, she led 2 national real estate businesses for their commercial bank. As head of Chase's community development group, Priscilla was instrumental in JP Morgan Chase's award-winning commitment to support Detroit's economic recovery. Prior to joining JP Morgan Chase, Priscilla was the president and CEO of New York State's Housing Finance and Mortgage Agency, where she is credited with transforming the agency and getting the agency through one of the riskiest moments in our industry's history, the Great Recession. Priscilla was named by Fortune as one of the nation's most 50 powerful Latinas, and also named by the Hispanic Business Association as 100 most influential Hispanics. She knows something about getting us through disasters. Jeff Hayward is Fannie Mae's Executive Vice President and Chief Administrative Officer, and is responsible for all of Fannie's mission-critical work on affordable housing and environmental, social, and governance activities. Under his tenure at Fannie Mae's Executive Vice President, he was responsible for all of Fannie Mae's multifamily business function housing in the United States and in every market. He oversaw the company's relationships with mortgage servicers with a focus on curtailing credit losses. Jeff also led Fannie Mae's community lending organization and was responsible for 5 business areas. He's been a true champion to create housing opportunities for the homeless, invest in rural and Native American communities, and rebuild along the Gulf Coast. Jeff knows a little bit about disasters. Renee Lewis Glover is a critical partner for both Fannie and Enterprise, and the hundreds of communities she has supported throughout her esteemed professional career in community development and housing. Renee sits on the board of directors of Fannie Mae, is the board of trustee for Enterprise, and is the founder of the Catalyst Group, a national consulting firm and business on urban revitalization, real estate development, and community building and business transformation. Ms. Glover also served on the board of directors for Habitat for Humanity International. She's the commissioner of the Bipartisan Policy Center Housing Commission and was executive director of the Atlanta Public Housing Authority for nearly 20 years. And finally, Janet Goldberg, who is the National Disaster Coordinator for HUD. Janet currently serves as HUD's leader for all of HUD's Office of Community Development Programming on disasters, and oversees the deployment of billions of dollars of funding from Congress to communities struck by disaster. She's been a deep and critical partner of Enterprise's Resiliency Disaster Recovery Initiative from the beginning. And we've worked closely with her through the years to figure out how we can prepare our communities to be ready to face risks that are both known and unknown. Now I would like to turn to Chief Executive Officer of Enterprise Community Partners, Priscilla Almodovar.
Thank you, Lori. Thank you, Lori. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Priscilla Almodovar, and I'm the President and Chief Executive Officer of Enterprise Community Partners. On behalf of the entire Enterprise team and our partners at Fannie Mae and at the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, we welcome you to today's Ready to Respond Resilience Symposium. It's incredible that we're joined by 1,800 partners in various sectors, from insurance to banking to housing to government to nonprofits, to talk about resiliency for all housing, particularly affordable housing. You know, this symposium could not be more timely. 2020 is going down as a record-breaking year storm season. There were 30 storms, named storms this year. 13 of them became full-blown hurricanes. Communities across the country also faced severe hailstorms, tornadoes, and of course we know the destructive fires in California's history. These events have a devastating effect on people and their homes and cause billions of dollars in property damage, leaving entire communities without electricity for days on end. They destroy infrastructure such as damaged roads and bridges, and they tremendously overwhelm essential services. And what this year's pandemic has also highlighted once again, now given it's a different disaster, but a disaster nevertheless, that the most vulnerable communities, particularly communities of color, are the most impacted and take the longest to recover when any type of disaster hits. Now, let me spend a few minutes on housing and why enterprises particularly focus on the importance of disaster preparedness. We have an affordable housing shortage in this country. Today, 1 in 4 low-income renters do not have an affordable place to live. Natural disasters only compound the shortage. They take units offline and they displace families, very often to homelessness. In the past 15 years, millions of American homes have been damaged or destroyed by weather-related disorders. And the risk to housing keeps growing. By 2050, a recent study estimates that virtually every coastal state is expected to have affordable housing that is exposed to a so-called coastal flood risk event. That's up from half of coastal states in the year 2000. Affordable rental housing is the lifeline for tens of millions of households across the nation, especially for people of color who are more likely to rent than white households. In fact, 80% of Black households rent instead of own a home. Today, there are currently 200,000 federally subsidized rental housing units in floodplains. And equally important are the Class B, Class C apartment buildings that are a very important part of our affordable housing stock in this country. Very often, these properties tend to be older and in need of repair. They were built with substandard materials that today cannot withstand extreme weather conditions. And they tend to be in flood zones because back then they were where land was cheaper. And there's some other stunning facts for us to consider as we have this discussion today. The National Climate Assessment projects there are homes and businesses worth at least $1.4 trillion within an eighth of a mile of coastal areas. And another report projects that 30 million people live in the combined 100-year and 500-year floodplains. Now at Enterprise, based on our experience as a funder, as an owner, and a developer, we know that there are proven resilience practices to mitigate climate risk. This August was the 15th anniversary of Hurricane Katrina. I don't know if many of you know that Enterprise was the co-developer and is the current operator of Foodberg Lafitte. It was a public housing complex built maybe in the 1940s that was destroyed during Katrina. Today, all the housing is certified Enterprise Green Communities, and it was rebuilt to high flood elevation standards. And we ensured that we incorporated resilience improvements. We have seen our investment pay over tenfold. For example, most recently, about 3 years ago, New Orleans suffered a tremendous rain event and severe flooding. By simply elevating our multifamily housing above floodable levels, these homes remain dry and safe for the families and children that live there and rely on this housing. We have seen resiliency work. We know what to do. And in the long run, when we do, we save lives and we save communities. That is why our resilient and disaster recovery team is so excited to share one of the tools that they've created with the help of Fannie Mae and HUD and so many of you out there. I must add that while our focus today might be rental housing, Enterprise's tools are available to all real estate owners of all types of real estate in communities. When a disaster strikes, it's not just the housing that's impacted. It's the supermarkets where residents buy food. It's the other local businesses like barbers, pharmacies, restaurants, all the services that we all rely on that go offline when this disaster strikes. So I am delighted that we're here, and I'll close with this. All of us, whether you're an owner, an operator, a lender, an insurance carrier, a government partner, we all have an opportunity to set a vision for a safer housing nation by working together with partners. Just being here today tells us you're a partner and you're going to share this mission with us. And we are really excited to open up the symposium and share this tool with you. Thank you. Lori, back to you.
Thank you so much, Priscilla. Thank you so much for sharing your thoughts with us and setting the table for today's conversation. We have a profound set of work in front of us, as Priscilla has just stated, to meet the challenges of our day around extreme weather, a changing climate, and risk. We saw that after Superstorm Sandy, so many housing partners across the New York City region, both small and large, public and private, naturally occurring and regulated, were blindsided by the impacts of the storm, the power outages, and the disruption created. Through the launch and stewardship of our Sandy Recovery and Rebuilding Program, we had the opportunity to engage hundreds of housing owners. In the dark days following the storm, we partnered with the HUD Regional Office and Janet Goldberg to construct guidance for multifamily housing owners to deal with the next storm. We started with the older adult community. One of the profound things we discovered in those early days, and what really inspires us today, is the reality that the multifamily housing community is responsible. All of you on this call are responsible for millions of homes and millions of lives. That's a powerful responsibility. And we at Enterprise Community Partners take that seriously. We have taken the lead. We've taken this head on with our partners, Fannie Mae, Bellwether, and HUD, as you will learn about today. And when we surveyed the community over the period of 2 years, this is what we found. We found that 46% of multifamily housing owners and operators around the nation were not fully prepared to maintain operations and services following a disaster. And the lowest level of preparedness was around business continuity. We found that 75% of respondents reported they didn't have any disaster plans in place, and they had no roles for their staff. We also found that 65% just said they just weren't prepared around resident communications and engagement at all. Next slide. And this is a staggering number when you consider that the risks are emerging. Whether it's a fire, a flood, an earthquake, a windstorm, a funding shortfall, a cyber attack, or a pandemic. We know that these risks lay bare and compound existing inequalities. And as Priscilla said, structural barriers that the communities we serve face every single moment of the day, particularly and most pointedly in communities of color across the nation. Policies such as redlining, which have undercut the immunity of the community to floods and other risks. And over time, makes these communities more vulnerable to the ongoing and cascading risks and impacts from these events. Through our work at Enterprise as owners, and with thousands of owners across the nation and with you, we know that when your business functions are disrupted, your households are disrupted, your communities are disrupted, and our nation is unsettled. The tool we will share with you today will help to boost your immunity. Next slide. What we want you to do is join with us to ensure that today, in our effort together with you, you can take steps to manage in advance of the event the potential risks that your housing will face. While no emergency is the same, we know that there are critical assurances and steps that we can take to prepare for the worst case scenario. And you have the capacity to deal with wherever you are, from your home, from the office, from offsite. Next slide. We're living in a new normal. So many of you are calling from your homes. Our new normal is an age of volatility and uncertainty, where the risks we are facing are coming at us all too quickly, and we have to respond in often a matter of minutes. So we need to reframe our housing and protect it from risks, focusing on the mentality of survival, caring for the consumer, and creating business resiliency. We are still trying to figure out what this new normal is. But we know that so many communities we serve are literally on a cliff. And it is up to us to figure out how to protect those communities and our housing that we steward and operate from falling off the cliff. So what can you do? We're asking you to step forward with us today and get a plan. It's the least expensive and lightest lift thing that you can do, and you can start today. Next slide. We partnered with Fannie Mae and with HUD and with Bellwether to produce a best-in-class tool for you that will help you maintain your business continuity in the face of extreme risk. By creating your business continuity tool, you will outline how you will manage risk for your business, your administration, your residents, and your physical assets. The Ready to Respond tool, which is available to you for free, is a guide developed for specifically affordable multifamily housing organizations, small and large. This can be used by any housing organization. It is designed by, and it is designed for affordable housing organizations that face a particular set of risks like no other business. You operate 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. You cannot afford to go down for any minute of the day. There are too many people depending on you to keep your business running. This tool gives you the guidance you need to develop and templates you need to develop comprehensive disaster staffing plans to protect your buildings, again, engaging your residents and keeping continuity of service. It's a website and it's got planning templates that you fill out and then you get a plan. Next slide. This Ready to Respond toolkit is able to develop the kind of support you need. It is developed to do a few things. When using this toolkit, you will be able to first minimize your building damage and ensure quick return to service. Secondly, you'll support the safety, the preparedness, and the recovery of your staff, your residents, and all of those that depend on your community services. You'll also be able to maintain key business operations throughout a disaster. This is critical because the clock keeps ticking. Even though there's a disaster, your vendors still need to get paid. Your insurance partners need their documentation. You cannot miss a beat in this world. You have to be able to get back online. And so for planning an emergency event that makes you more resilient and more responsive, this will also help you address critical gaps in your business lines and in your services. By creating more efficiencies, being more effective, you can have more impact and you can be a better business partner. Next slide. The basic components of this plan and what we're providing you for free is to do 6 things. By utilizing the template system that we've presented, you'll be able to create a common operating picture to establish the expectation for you and your staff to your residents and your investors and your regulators, to identify any misalignment. You'll be able to ask yourself questions such as, would we have the capability of rehousing our residents if our building was to go offline? Do you have units in place or on hand to send your residents to? And what are you prepared to tell your residents? You'll be able to set expectations such as, will we be feeding our residents during an event? Or do we have the capability not to? You'll be able to set expectations to your investors and to your funders and your regulators, what you can and cannot do, what they can expect from you. Secondly, you'll be able to establish a situational awareness. And this will be critical to helping your staff understand what challenges you're taking on, where you're able to provide support, And then what is happening in the general community. You'll be able to liaison with community frontline workers and agencies. This is called situational awareness. You'll be able to establish your operational periods. We know that some storms come quickly. Some events happen without warning. Some events give us ample warning, but we need to understand our operational periods so we understand how to respond. Fourth, you'll be able to coordinate better. Emergency managers establish coordination, practical coordination protocols. You'll be able to communicate better, both externally and internally. In a world where Twitter has become the spokesperson or speaking entity for so many, for good and bad reason, we want to make sure that we've got a managed communications protocol in place. We provide this to you in this tool. And finally, we provide you with the information that you need to do your work and to get prepared in advance. All of these components are packaged together in easy to use templates that you can use and customize for your organization. Next slide, please. And sometimes you have time to prepare, such as a hurricane, where we know that 5 days out, 10 days out, the storm is coming and you've got time to prepare. Sometimes there is no preparation. A seismic event happens. There are little seconds in the day. We have no time to prepare. It comes in quickly, or a fire that ravages a community. So many of the communities across the nation, particularly in Colorado and California and Oregon, are dealing with these fires that just quickly move out of control, and housing owners are suffering. So we need you to know how to manage for the unexpected and the expected. And by preparing in advance, we give you the tools to do this. Next slide. The value proposition for you to use this kit is that it will help you address several pieces of your business line. Number one, it will address how you ensure that you understand your impacts to your assets, reduce displacement of households, protect your holdings and your reserves and your investments, and building investor confidence so that they know that you are the right entity and the right partner, that you're taking responsibility for all of your continuity needs. Next slide, please. So the first thing we want to do is we want to start off by identifying our risks. And in this tool, we've got a way to identify and rate your risks. First, you need to identify all of the risks that you face. And again, we provide you with a tool that helps you do that with all of the best-in-class information. And the next move you want to make is you want to, next slide, please, identify your leader. You have to have a leader to ensure that you produce a plan that works. This leader should be familiar with your organization. They should be accountable to your executive team. They should be able to drive this forward, because without a captain, a ship cannot move. We need someone to champion and drive this forward. Next slide. And the next thing you need to do is appoint your staff that are responsible for the plan. We want to make sure that there's accountability in your organizations, that this plan that we're giving you today, this template, actually ensures that there's going to be staffing accountability so that we know who's on first when there's an event. And we provide you with tools to help you do that. Next slide. Because we know that the staffing, that the building plan will rise and fall based on whether or not your staff are prepared. So this plan that we're providing to you relies on human resources, your porters, your administration, your tenants, to establish a unified and aligned team. Engaging your staff and residents is the best way to create an active and realistic continuity plan. Everyone's voice and actions count during emergency planning and business continuity. Next slide. And we want to emphasize that all of the tools we're providing to you, and there are many in there, help you understand how to support residents, buildings, and business, because business continuity for our sector is more than just having an insurance plan in place. It is about an aligned and interconnected system between your residents, your buildings, your operators. Next slide. And then finally, practicing your response. A plan that's not practiced and tested is no plan. it's important to get together with your team and to practice and drill this plan. And we provide you with the kind of information you need to do just that. And so with all of this together, this is an opportunity for us to provide you with a plan that you can use as a template. And this plan can be helpful to you in blue sky and in extreme situations. Next slide, please. So now we're gonna host a poll to ask you whether or not you are prepared. So we're gonna ask you if you have a business continuity plan. Please let us know. Final slide, Andrea. So today we are stepping forward with our team, with Fannie and Bellwether and HUD, to ask you to enroll with us and enlist in building your emergency business continuity plan. For everyone who signs up today, we are offering technical assistance to the first 100 owners and operators that sign up today. To get ready to respond, we will provide you with technical assistance and support. We are looking for 100 partners to step forward as the nation's first cohort to get a business continuity plan, so you can say to the nation that you are taking the commitment and getting ready to respond to any event or any emergency that you will be facing. And it seems to me, based on this poll, that this is something that many of you need, that 54% of you have a plan, but there's a lot more that also needs some support. So we are ready to step forward with you and provide this service. And we're excited to have this opportunity to share with you the reasons why we should do this. With further ado, I would like to now turn to Jeff Hayward from Fannie Mae to give us some thoughts and impressions on Fannie Mae's commitment to this space.
Thank you very much, Lori, and good afternoon. And thank you to our partners at Bellwether and to HUD and others for giving us an opportunity to participate in this symposium today. I want to start out by talking about the journey of dealing with disaster events for us in Fannie Mae, and I'll tie it into what this tool does. So we began in earnest, really focusing after Hurricane Katrina 15 years ago, as Priscilla talked about. And as the risk manager for 1 out of 4 houses in America and 1 out of 5 apartment buildings in America, it occurred to us that we have a risk management responsibility to make sure that we are part of the solution as these things happen. And so we sent 20% of our workforce actually worked with the aftermath of Katrina. And since then, in every major storm, we have sent our employees to bear to work in helping to rebuild these communities as they experience their periods of stress. In that journey, we have learned one thing, which is maybe if people had a plan, a better plan, an executable plan, that the aftermath of the storm wouldn't be as severe. And that really is not just our obligation to be prepared for a storm for risk management state, meaning that we don't lose our investment or we don't have some financial consequence. The real reason why we need people to be prepared is all about our neighbors. And that is a neighbor with a plan, a neighbor with options. When these events happen, they have a much better chance of being able to stand and be there with their family, being able to survive and thrive despite the event that happened to them. So our interest in development of this tool is all about not just the head part. The head part is managing the risk, making sure that you have as few losses as possible. But it's the heart part. It's saying, don't we owe our neighbors the right to be prepared so when a storm happens, they really aren't affected as much as they would have been had they not had a plan. So the help is here. The help is here. The tool is here. It is yours to use right now, today, without delay. And I urge you all to use this tool, get a plan, and do it not because you want to protect the money you invested, but do it because you want your neighbor to be better off after the storm than they would have been otherwise. And with that, I'll turn it back over to Lori.
Thank you so much, Jeff. And thank you for Fannie Mae's commitment to this work. You know, of all partners, how important it is to ensure that we protect our assets and our homes. I'd like to now ask Renee Lewis Glover to join us.
Good afternoon, and I am so pleased to be here, and thank you everyone for participating in this important seminar. A lot has been said, but I want to underscore the power of partnerships. The fact that enterprise community partners, Fannie Mae, and HUD and Bellwether Enterprises have all come together with the larger housing community to help solve problems that we know are predictable, given the fact that, you know, climate change is real. And we've experienced just this year so many events that have been driven by the fact that we have to continue to be better stewards of the planet, and therefore these things will happen until we've made progress. So a couple of things that I want to say. We've already stated for the record that too often the lower and moderate income families are impacted more harshly by these events. That is true, but that does not mean that you have to be victimized by these events, because there are tools and there are partners who can make a difference. And so what I want to stress, if nothing else, is that let's not be victimized by these events. Let's be smart, let's prepare, and let's plan. And the great thing is that as we continue to come together and form community, I think the actors that are here today, Enterprise, Fannie Mae, HUD, Bellwether, all of these organizations that I know and know well have the passion and the heart and the expertise to partner with all of you to make a difference. And so let's be sure to plan and engage. And I want to leave you with this thought. Maya Angelou, who was just a fabulous human being, always said, when you know better, you do better. So let's all plan to do better by our neighbors. And I love Jeff's emphasis on why this is important. Yes, we absolutely have to plan better and do better as we are building these communities and raising standards and applying the learning that grows out of all of these events. But most importantly, we have to make sure that we're planning so that the impacts are not devastating, which causes this loss of life and confusion. So I encourage you to take advantage of this toolkit, to engage, to build community, to prepare, and then as we rebuild the communities, we will take into account the things that we've learned through some of the disinvestment that has occurred in too many of these communities. But we are not victims. We're actually the masters of our fate if we do the right thing in terms of planning and taking advantage of these tools. So I want to thank everyone for being here today, and also for these great partners, Fannie Mae, Enterprise, Bellwether Enterprises, and HUD. And so with that, I will go back to you, Lauren.
Thank you so much, Renee. And I Everyone has written that quote down for my Angela. I'd like to now introduce Janet Goldberg, who is the National Disaster Coordinator for HUD.
Thank you, Laura. Good morning and good afternoon. I would like to thank Fannie Mae, Bellwether, and Enterprise for sponsoring the launch of this amazing toolkit. I first would like to talk to you and give you a brief description of what HUD's evolving role is in disasters and resilience efforts. Over the last several years, the nation has not only had an increasing number of events, wildfires, typhoons, volcanic eruptions, but it also has increasing number of them as well. And as such, HUD's role has expanded to include not only working with HUD's assisted portfolios, public housing authorities and multifamily owners on disaster recovery, response and resilience efforts, but also to support the states, territories, and the Commonwealth in their overall disaster housing recovery and mitigation efforts. As communities after communities suffer multiple events in shorter and shorter periods of time, the number of housing units, especially affordable multifamily housing units that are impacted is staggering. Thousands and thousands of units in communities where there's already a need, dire need for affordable housing units. States are recognizing the importance of having the communities prepared and the need to adopt mitigation and resilience measures in a steady state, not just when we're doing recovery efforts. HUD has oversight of the Community Development Block Grant Disaster Recovery Funding, better known as CDBG-DR, which over time has already invested $50 billion in funding from Congress to the states for disaster recovery and mitigation efforts. In the last few years, Congress has appropriated over $16 billion in CDBG mitigation funding that is solely dedicated to mitigation and resilience improvements. As you can see, just with CDBG-DR and MIT funding amounts, which doesn't include the billions of dollars of FEMA funding and other federal, state, and local funding that is dedicated toward disaster recovery efforts, you can tell that these efforts are costly, they take a long time, and definitely take a toll on the social and economic fabric of a community. This exemplifies why preparedness is so important. And just think if we were able to spend that kind of funding on preparedness and mitigation rather than recovery efforts, communities and residents would be in a much better place when an event does occur. HUD's focus on preparedness actually began with Hurricane Katrina, when many elderly housing projects needed to be evacuated, and the property owners had no evacuation plans or had not coordinated with federal, state, or local partners and resources to evacuate their residents. For the HUD-assisted portfolio, we initiated the requirement that owners have evacuation plans for their residents going forward. With her Superstorm Sandy, there were many residents, elderly residents in particular, in both HUD-assisted and non-assisted HUD housing, where the elderly residents did not want to evacuate. They wanted to stay in place, and owners struggled to get water, blankets, food, medical supplies to their residents. Recognizing this need to have multifamily owners better prepared for future disasters, to include evacuation and sheltering in place, I'd worked with Enterprise, as Laura mentioned earlier, to identify and fill gaps of what was needed for the elderly and the disabled if a disaster did occur. And this was the beginning of the toolkit that now is being launched today. I was very pleased to see the partnership with Fannie Mae, Bellwether, and Enterprise. We're thrilled to have 1,800 respondents on this call on this business continuity toolkit, and the expansion of the kit to include all types of multifamily housing, affordable housing. And we cannot stress enough that all housing organizations should have a business continuity plan, as one never knows when a disaster may occur in your community and or your project and what those impacts will be. This toolkit provides organizations with a step-by-step process to think through how your organizations will respond, what community relationships are important to cultivate, and most importantly, to ensure the residents are ready to respond as well. We have seen these organizations utilize these different initial versions of the toolkit and become confident that their organizations are better prepared to respond to disasters in the future. Thank you again. Thank you all for participating. Turn it back over to you, Lori.
Thank you so much, Janet. And it really is a pleasure to be here with you today in the virtual space to launch this important tool. I'd like to now welcome our panelists to come forward in the visual world, in the virtual world. If we were together in a person, we would all be on stage, but thank you so much. Jeff, excellent. Renee, Priscilla, Janet, Jeff, we have a lot of questions on the audience, but I want to ask you all one specific question. Given the risks that we have just reviewed, given the incredible challenges facing so many of the communities that we serve, as we move into 21 and a new year of risks and storms and fires, unfortunately, what are some of the steps and strategies that you think we can take together as partners to increase the resiliency of communities that are at incredible vulnerability to climate risk?
I'll start out. One of the things I've thought about is these events happen where communities are connected in ways that they, on a daily basis, don't see themselves as being connected, but they really are. And so I think the first thing is in your locality to really have a disaster response playbook that is your locality's playbook. So I would recommend that a task force with local developers, the housing authority, and those in government, let's say the mayor's office of the city, really sit down and begin to develop their resiliency playbook, that they do it before the storm. And if you're in a coastal area, if you don't have a community-based, all-considerate resiliency plan, you're really kind of missing out. And I love what Priscilla talked about. It's not just the housing part, which is near and dear to what we do every day for our work. It really is, do you have an inclusive plan that includes the stores and the hospitals and the others that are part of what we all know as community and get comfortable with community? So my thing would be a renewed effort to have a facilitated and coordinated resiliency response that includes all of us, people like us and Enterprise and Bellwether and Hood, but not just us, because we're national. These problems are actually solved best when people together in their local community are on the same page, know who has what, who can rely on who for what. And so when it happens, the event happens, we're not stuck. Your community is protected.
Yeah, I'd like to insert, it's interesting. We spend quite a few dollars locally in terms of doing preventative maintenance and that type of thing. And so I think that there are dollars that could be spent smartly to prepare for things that we know are likely to happen. So if something is being rehabilitated, or if there are other things that you notice would improve the quality of the infrastructure. I know that there are a number of cities, localities going through the process of burying the power lines. And then that will then prevent the many outages where, people either left in darkness for so long or cold or whatever. I mean, so there are a number of things. So in addition to the evacuation plans and those types of things, I think we all as housers need to be applying the learning that grows out of each one of these events and say, well, gee, when I am not in the middle of a disaster, what can I do strategically to improve the quality of the infrastructure? Because, housing, like everything else, should change and keep pace with the larger context of things that are happening. And each of us, last but not least, should be actively engage with the policymakers to make sure that the decisions that are made around budgets, federal, state, and local budgets, in fact, are very powerful policy tools. And so engage, because as Jeff said, the local players know best what needs to happen. And so again, be an actively engaged party participating in these things, and you'll be amazed at what can get done. And I think when the federal government, this was certainly my experience when I was working with the Housing Authority, gets engaged and is creative in building partnerships, you'll be amazed how that will change the impressions of the Congress people. And they say, well, gee, this is a community that is actively engaged, and I want to invest there because I see progress, and they're not looking solely to us, but everybody is coming together. So I want to make this statement about the power of partnerships is incredibly important.
Janet?
Yeah, what I think I would add, I will echo, I think both what Jeff and Renee said for sure. One is to definitely make sure that you do understand, or if your community does not have an emergency management plan, that you should work collaboratively to be part of that planning process. If they do have a plan, you should be, you should know it and understand what the resources are available in your community when in fact the, a disaster does occur, and what resources can assist you in making sure that whatever happens with the residents, be evacuation or sheltering in place, is helped. I will also, reiterate strongly about making sure on resilience that you're thinking of it in steady state when there are not a lot, there's not a disaster, when people's sensitivities and tensions are high, not good decisions are made with infrastructure. We see that all the time in the work that we're doing today. And so, you should build resilience in, especially even as a developer, you're developing a project. If you're an agency in a government, when you are looking at development, make sure that you are looking at mitigation resilience efforts. And, we know that they're costly, but they save in the long run, then in fact, when you have a disaster. So important, and we are striving here at HUD to actually look to the projects that we're funding to make sure that that is taken into account, and the risks of having projects, especially on the Gulf Coast, that we are taking the communities are taking the necessary mitigation measures to ensure that, that housing can withstand the type of unfortunate disasters that are occurring right now.
Yeah, and I'm going to hop back in here again, because I think something Priscilla said earlier really struck me, which is Enterprise had a project in New Orleans that was built to resilience. And as the storms have happened over the years, it's withstood. I think that should not be the exception. That should be the rule. And so I think as people go to do their plan, when they talk about rebuilding for the sake of the community, to do it thoughtfully, it's got to consider what happens if the storm happens again, and how can we protect ourselves. Now, a storm coming for all of us is, as financial institutions look at how they want to lend and what are the standards by which they're going to lend, this idea of resiliency will affect all communities, because at some point there will be standards from prudential regulators that say that if an asset cannot withstand these kinds of storms, then maybe it isn't collateral for the kind of loan that you should do. So this whole issue around resiliency, we can get in front of this. If we're all thoughtful about this, this doesn't have to be something where we all become a victim of. But the hardcore facts are, eventually, we're going to have to be at a place where we always build back to be resilient. That's going to have to be what the standard is. It's not here yet, But anybody who's thought about this for a minute knows eventually it's going to be here because these storms aren't going to stop.
Priscilla.
Yeah, look, I agree. I echo many of the comments that have been made. I'll come over there, both your shoulders on two things, and then I want to add just one more. On the business continuity plan, Janet, I cannot agree with you more. These plans are not something to put on the shelf, right? They're supposed to be dynamic, because the risk I'm worried about is the one we don't know today. So you constantly have to test your plan. And as Janet says, not when it's stressful, but all the time. So I just want to echo that again. Number two, this engagement of the residents and your tenants, even commercial tenants. I think this pandemic has done something unusual that as an owner, it would be a missed opportunity, but we've been engaging with our residents very differently, right? They have been sheltering in our properties. Let's use that opportunity to continue that level of engagement to make sure that residents know what resources are available to them and how we work together in partnership. And this concept of place, I mentioned that because we're all seeing, we're all one ecosystem. It's your home, it's your business, it's your food. So I want to stress that. And I want to add one that I don't think has been mentioned. As policymakers, we need to advocate that when we do rebuild, that we do so equitably. Enterprise has been involved in many recoveries. Katrina was one, Sandy, Hurricane Maria were very involved after Harvey. How we rebuild and how resources are reallocated is a critical item. And I think we all should be part of that as well.
And I want to build on that point, Priscilla, because that's so important. And one of the things that Dr. King used to always say is that we're all in this together. And so if you're building resilience, you have to do it in an equitable way and in a comprehensive way, because just because your neighbor up the street may have more resources and therefore maybe greater access to some of the resources, the neighbors further down the street who may have less resources, when the storm comes in, they're not going to say, oh, I'm going to hop over those areas because the higher income folks are living here versus it's all going to hit. And I think pandemic is such a great analog, if you will, in terms of how these things happen. And I think it has underscored the importance of community. And if we plan and look out for each other, we strengthen the entire community. And I think that we have come to realize that we are our brothers and sisters keepers. And so I think working together, these partnerships that are happening, because I think these are all very smart players, but the recognition that in order for us to be a great country, we have to take care of everyone. And over time, as we have more resilient communities, better quality housing, access to great education and healthcare and all of that, we're going to strengthen the whole to such a point that we won't need so many of these kind of firefighting efforts, because we'll be building it in because we want exactly the same thing for all of our neighbors. But for the grace of God, that could be each of us in that circumstance at some point in our lives.
Priscilla, as a lender, previously and currently, what comes up for you in terms of this?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. And Jeff, I'm curious to hear what you have to say about this. As a lender, and I would think this applies to insurance carriers as well, our underwriting models tend to be backwards looking. So how do we as a financing industry talk about climate risk and assess the risk that has some forward looking? And I'm not sure what that means, how we underwrite. and how we encourage our borrowers that do take the responsible steps to strengthen their assets by making them weather resistant, if you will. It costs money to do that. Can we in our underwriting underwrite to that? Because hopefully their loss, their property loss, should be less if they make these investments. So I think as an industry, it's a good question. So I don't have an answer, Jeff. I'd love to hear how Fannie's thinking about this as a lender, but I do think that our underwriting models are old. And is there a way for us to even maybe incorporate, there's a lot of data now in migration analysis and understanding climate patterns. Is there a way, particularly in insurance, to incorporate that and how we underwrite this risk? Jeff, what do you think?
One, I think there isn't much time between now and when there's a standard that underwrites more than in-place cash flows. So today we underwrite in-place cash flows and in-place expenses, and we project expenses and cash flows over the time of the loan. What is going to happen, there will be a standard. Do you have a resiliency plan? Is it operational? Can you prove it? And I think that's going to be part of the underwriting. We will ask, give me your resiliency plan. And in addition to your cash flows and to your expenses and to the condition of the property, we're going to look at what's your resiliency plan. That'll be part of the underwriting. That day is not far off. And if you look at what the regulators just passed, there was a group of regulators that issued a report on climate risk. This came out about 2 months ago. And essentially what it said is the regulators are going to start going to the banks and saying, show me in your portfolio where you underwrote climate risk. Where's it at? And part of underwriting the climate risk is one, understanding the science, where the event's going to be, what's the likelihood of an event, but also it's going to be for that individual credit, what's their plan? And in their ability to repay is going to be, can they repay after there's been a substantial event? Now, one, I'll say it's a matter of public record. So far, we've had not that many losses from our big portfolio, but that is a looking backward statement because that is largely because of the number of storms in the past. That's about to intensify. So it's going to change. And so in answer to your question, Priscilla, the underwriting standard isn't here. But I would say 6 months from now, 12 months from now, I would not be surprised if that's part of the underwriting.
And I'll add that the cost of insurance, I mean, we're kidding ourselves if we don't think that the insurance industry is not looking at this as a likely risk, because the fact of the matter is that if you just look at the number of occurrences that have happened this year in terms of all types of weather-related incidents, that's a reality. And so if we don't start planning in a way that's going to mitigate that exposure, there may be a number of insurance companies that just won't underwrite these events in different areas because it's going to become too costly. So I think that the reality of what is happening has to inform both underwriting and the ability to get casualty insurance.
And then I'm going to bring in one more aspect that makes this issue of resiliency in a plan more urgent. As investors buy stocks, buy equities, buy bonds, more and more they're asking the question, please tell me the assets underneath what I'm buying are resilient. And if you can't answer that question in the affirmative, some of the capital that's available for financing is going to dry up because investors' money is not going to go there. So the imperative here is this is all circling. You can read it. It's happening every day. This is not something off in the future. Having a plan is going to be table stakes. This is not going to be an option that we talked about. Do you have a plan? And as Janet says, is it a plan that really isn't on your shelf with dust, but you're really doing it? That's going to be table stakes. And if everybody thinks that table stakes is going to be a year from now, I got news for you. That's not going to be a year from now. The time it's now. It's not tomorrow, it's now, at least in my view.
Absolutely. Laura, you're on mute, I think.
Okay, thank you so much, Renee. Jeff, you raised a very important point that I wanted to, Jana, ask you. I mean, you know, we started off this journey many years ago after Sandy to figure out how to support older adults. We gathered hundreds of senior housing providers together, and they all said, you know, we are just at the end of our rope. We are providing services, we're case managers. You know, these storms throw everything into question. And so really having that business continuity in place is so critical. But, you know, in your work across the nation, you are asking communities to weigh in to the programs, asking for community input into HUD's action planning. Are there some best practices you've seen from communities to help us think about building resiliency and how HUD is responding?
So I'm going to actually let Gina take that question, because often when we go in, it's after the disaster has happened, and our job is to help rescue the community from its stress. So we have much more experience seeing it there. But on the efficacy of the plans, I'll let Gina answer that.
Janet?
Yeah, no problem. So I think that the communities that are getting more and more storms, right? I think resilience there and their planning, they are starting to pivot. And I think we're working with them to do that, to look at, longer term mitigation efforts that will really strengthen their resilience going forward. That it's just not, well, we'll just fix this particular, we'll just plant the electrical poles just in this particular community because that's the one that got hardest hit, right? We are pushing them to look at it community-wide, and back to, I think, one of the earlier questions, that every house in the community benefits from the poles being underground, right? Not just because if you're from this subdivision or that part of the community, that we're making sure that we are going ahead and they're looking at it more comprehensively, even if part of the community did not get impacted by storms, which is happening. Not all of a community, has the same amount of devastation. That when you're looking though at the mitigation efforts, either steady state or after disaster, that you're looking at it as a community-wide effort, because this part of the community might not have gotten hit this time, but most likely next time it will get hit. Louisiana, perfect example. New Orleans, that area with Katrina. Lake Charles got pretty lucky for a few years. Lake Charles got devastated now with Laura and Delta. And so you can't say that any particular area, because they didn't get hit the first time, isn't going to get hit, as these storms keep coming and coming and coming. So they have to, and I think Louisiana, just because of the amount of events, they do now have a mitigation long-term plan in place. And when we are now giving them additional money, if Congress appropriates it, we are going to be looking at how does the efforts they do now with this latest round of money, how does that play into the plan they already have? How should that plan maybe modified? Because now we have additional areas that have been impacted. And we're trying to look at it once again as a very comprehensive effort and encouraging the states to do it in that manner.
Thank you, Janet. We have a question coming in that I do want to put forward. I think it tees up the bigger question about how do we bring in more capital resources. This tool that we're providing to our community is totally free, zero. All you have to spend is staff time to create the plan, but we're trying to provide to you something that you would be charged a premium for in the market, because we know how important it is for you to have best-in-class information and expertise that weighed in on the development of the plan, from insurance experts to vendors to contractors to the AIA. All of them provided us with information that we're now giving you for free. But not everything in life is free, and not everything in the space of buildings and homes are unfortunately free. And we see that Janet, the public housing portfolio, less and less funding is going into operations and capital improvements. We know how difficult it is to get funding, subsidy, and grants to owners and operators. So, Jeff, I mean, Priscilla and Renee and Janet, you're all sort of in working in step with many different funding sources. Jeff, you're in touch with the ESG community. Priscilla, low-income housing tax credit. Janet, you're working with a variety of federal agencies. What can we do to provide some additional funding? What do we need to provide more support to the community to get more prepared?
Well, I'll just say, as an overarching view, is that an educated populace is the most important asset to this issue. And you've got to get engaged, and everyone has to get engaged. And the policymakers listen to the parties who come armed with data, a willingness to cooperate and collaborate with the plan. And those are the areas that get funding. And if everybody sits back and waits on the next emergency to occur without this forward looking planning and engagement, then we only have ourselves to blame, because we know we live through the impacts. And so I would just say, as part of our planning, we have to educate, engage the residents and the business owners, and then get involved with the city councils, the county commissioners. I mean, each time budgets are passed, those are policy documents. And if you're not there saying, what about us? We have these issues. We had 100 different power outages to occur in and get the data and get it. Data is so powerful because it's independent, it's not emotional, and you can show the value proposition. And if everybody comes together, that's how we're going to be able to help the policymakers understand that it takes more than good wishes and good statements. It takes investment, because if you invest smartly on the front end, that will prevent costs that will be there. I don't know who's going to pay for them, but those costs will be there if you plan poorly and if you don't invest, because this is just the reality of what we're facing.
So, Lori, I think there's a couple aspects to where funding will come from. So it starts with, today, there are RAD projects, for instance, that are happening. If in the RAD projects, and this is billions of dollars, if there's no resiliency component to that, then these RAD projects are not conceived properly. So I say the first kind of call to action is to review all the RAD projects that are happening. We finance some of these. And that's not new money, it's just use the money that's available correctly. And so I think the first kind of instructive step, and everybody has the power who's doing this work, is to look at these plans when we change public housing or we change affordable housing, to look at the plans and is there resiliency aspect to it? And if there's not, let's reconsider, let's stop. We know these storms are coming, let's stop and kind of rework this a little bit and measure twice before we cut. So I think that's one. I think going forward, some of the new cash that comes into these issues will be because of the standard setting. Lenders are going to set standards and they're going to demand that the money flows to do resiliency. So some of this is going to come from private sector in their own enlightened self-interest. They're not doing it because they want to help the public. They're doing it because they want to protect their investments. And so I think that's a piece of the puzzle. The other piece of the puzzle for funding is what Renee talked about. Public funding has got to put this new demand front and center. And that has to come from all of us. And so we have to get people smart, as Renee says, and then they got to demand that if we're going to be spending money, let's spend money on where we don't have to spend it 5 times. We're spending it once and we're spending it right. But that has to be public discourse and public discussions.
And then Jeff, I would say, I totally agree. I would say that all government resources should be aligned if they're aligned. So the states play a very key role, right? So I would think if you're a state housing agency, any new light tech property, to your point, should be table stakes of how they're building, right? If anyone has mechanicals in their lower floor, don't grant them credits, right? And there should be some stuff, we know what to do for new build. The preservation is the harder part. Housing agencies could assign more points for preservation, right? Which is, something that has to be done. The numbers, we know the margins are thin. So are there ways that we can drive resources through the state housing agencies with tax credits? HUD plays a huge role, right? Whether it's CDBG, DR, or otherwise, how could the federal resources be coordinated better with the state resources? And by that, I mean timing. Timing sometimes is an issue. We're seeing that in places like Harvey, Texas with Harvey and Maria, how we coordinate state, federal resources to come together to create the right incentives for developers to build the right way and timely to recover quickly. And then I would just say, some things require much bigger conversation, whether it's infrastructure and spend. This just is broader, this is ultimately about building infrastructure as well, whether it's our water lines, sewage, electrical lines. I mean, this is a much broader conversation. Housing is just a piece back to this place. I think the broader, making sure that this topic is front and center and the broader topic of infrastructure across the country.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, and I just want to underscore that alignment is so critically important because if all of these agencies, federal, state, local infrastructure, which is typically locally driven, but it's again growing out of a planning process in terms of where these things are being invested. Everybody is incented to do the right thing, but the inputs that come from the developers, the community, all of the stakeholders across all of the different silos help inform all of this. And if we really could do this, we could make some brilliant decisions about coordination and doing a ton of good, because we wouldn't be acting in these separate silos, but acting in harmony to really have the desired outcomes and outputs that we all want and know need to happen.
Yeah, and one thing I'll just add, the reason why I agree, and I think it's important to think of it very holistically. I made that comment in my remarks. One thing we learned from COVID is that these small and medium-sized buildings are half of the multifamily housing stock in this country. So, obviously there's the public housing stock, there's the, 60% the LIHTC stock, but there is a lot of lowercase a, small case affordable that also, they're owned by mom and pop owners. I mean, we learned that through COVID. So that's why the broader infrastructure conversation helps the entire community, because they don't have the resources or access to some of these government programs that the subsidized housing has. So one thing I've learned from this crisis is that small, medium-sized owner as well is critical.
Priscilla, I'm glad you brought that up. I'd like to reflect, we in our Southern California market office, we convened small and naturally occurring affordable housing owners and stakeholders to respond to Mayor Garcetti's mandate to seismically update these buildings that are soft story and at really great vulnerability to earthquakes. And this is the largesse of Los Angeles's affordable housing, soft story, small to medium-sized businesses. And they said, yes, we just need to figure out a vehicle to finance this work. And we had a scenario where there was a carrot, there was a stick, which is a mandate from the mayor to upgrade these buildings, but we just needed to find the carrot. So there are communities across the nation, smaller, mid-sized buildings that are struggling to figure out how to meet the demands of the day and of the future, as Jeff said. Well, we have a lot of questions coming in, but I want to serve as one question from Conlin, which is, we manage an affordable housing project in a flood zone, in a 100-year flood zone, which means it's at risk, 25% chance of flooding every year. When we built it 15 years back in Houston, due to climate change and development, the property is now at great risk. We've been hit 3 times. We're repeated lost property. What can we do about this? Because if we knock it down, we're going to lose 150 severely needed affordable housing units from the supply, and we cannot replace it. So this is one of 20 questions about the inability to replace housing stock that's being threatened by climate change. So I'd like to field this to the panel. If anyone has any responses or advice, or what can we do to deal with this very, very difficult but yet common situation?
Well, one, I'll start by saying there's none of us as panelists are jumping to answer this question. If you notice, no one was itching to get in and say, okay, let me try to go into this minefield that's full of bullets. But let me give some context. I think the challenge for us now is to try to come up with some sort of retrofit, some financing that is some combination of debt and equity. And I don't, if you ask me how to do that, I don't quite know yet. But I remember when I worked on earthquake matters in California back in the 90s. I was at Fannie Mae then. And one of the ways that we kind of got out of the earthquake risk that we had was we had a loan program for retrofitting. So in essence, we let you borrow up so you could retrofit your property so it could withstand an earthquake. I think that kind of approach where we figure out how to bring some capital to the retrofit business. Can you retrofit a building like that? And I don't know engineerily, from an engineering standpoint, if that's possible for this building. But I think it's a matter of policy. We'll have to figure out, is there a retrofit component that will make existing structures withstand storms better? Is there a way to bring some capital? And that might be some combination of low interest financing from the government. It might be kind of a shared equity where some investor will come in and put up the equity for the retrofit in return for a portion of the rents. Those kinds of innovative approaches to financing would seem to be appropriate in that kind of instance.
Yeah, and I'll wade into these waters because these are very difficult.
No pun intended.
Yes. This is not unlike environmentally damaged soils. And it may well be, and I think all the assessments should be done to make sure that you've exhausted all the ideas of, what kind of retrofit, can you build it higher? Can you use different materials and this, that, and the other? But in some circumstances, there are some areas that just should have never been built on in the beginning. And I know when I was at the Housing Authority, we had a situation where we literally had to level a property because the soils were so damaged and they were so deep. Because keep in mind, a lot of these properties were built before there were any environmental standards. And unfortunately, because everyone was looking for cheap land and there weren't environmental standards, these buildings were placed without all of those sensibilities. So I think that when you attack even the areas that are constantly flooding, if you think about the disruption that occurs to the families who are living in those kinds of conditions and the heartache and heartbreak, and you never recover 100%. Okay, I don't care how much money is thrown at it. You lose lives, you lose memories. It's just so many things. So better that the professionals, and this is where integrity is so critically important in building trust, but do the assessments. And I think that's just the integrity of what the professionals have to bring, that if it can't be done or shouldn't be done because it will just be a revolving door of heartache and headache, I would say make that decision. And then I know all of the agencies will come together and help with relocation, vouchers, those types of things, or identify other areas that can be built upon responsibly. Because the fact of the matter is that at some point, the investors aren't going to invest in that in any event, because there will be a change in the standards that says if flooding occurs ever so many, the insurance companies are not going to be there, nor are the investors. And I think we have to bring to the work the integrity that says, and not placates, but actually working in partnership with the residents who are impacted, that this isn't a smart move. And they'll know, and they'll also respect that you had the courage to be honest about the assessment of the situation.
So Jeff, I'll tell you why I didn't weigh in. That's why it's great to have Renee and you on this panel. This is a big issue. Renee, to your point, certain land should, in hindsight, should not have been built. Building codes weren't set up for this. And one of the enterprise is now spending time on right now is this topic of climate migrants. I think it was this year alone, 1.2 million Americans have been displaced from their homes and can't move back. And worldwide, that number, I was trying to see if I can find it, it's astronomical. So this topic of where we rebuild, and these are people's homes that we're talking about, I think is a really important question for everyone, policymakers in particular. And where do go? Where do people go?
So while we're wading into waters, I also want to point out that, and I'm such a strong proponent of mixed use, mixed income communities. I think this notion, and it's particularly a touchy subject in certain parts of the country, but I think inclusionary zoning really makes sense, so that we're not trying to build housing for different economic classes, but we're building housing as a community should be built, which is, if you see how our companies are organized, where we build housing for workers, middle management, upper management, we build housing that includes affordable housing, workforce housing, and market rate housing. And we will find that there will be a smarter allocation of infrastructure costs, other costs, and that type of thing. And the struggle that we have at this point with trying to identify land that is affordable is because we're still segregated in our approach in terms of solving the housing issues. And I think that will change over time. And there's certainly been a greater embrace of this notion of building economically and culturally and socially integrated housing. But we've got to continue to work on that, because I think we are getting signals back from higher powers that we're going about this wrong, and we have to stay with it. And I think this will help us solve the issues. And in those areas where, with the right types of incentives, inclusionary zoning has been embraced, all of a sudden you're beginning to see more affordable housing resources. And I think we've got to work both at that level as well as doing the short-term impacts. But that's, there's just not enough resources in the world for us to continue to be segregated in all of our approaches. It's the wrong policy. It's fundamentally flawed, and it drives these inequities, where we talk about food deserts and all types of deserts and what have you. That's because we don't have enough resources to replicate the infrastructure and all the things that are needed, like great schools and what have you, as we continue to segregate, growing out of the Jim Crow era and what have you. But, we'll get there. But I think long term, that's where we'll really solve this issue.
I want to say, first of all, while we're having this incredible conversation, we have more than 150 owners and organizations that have signed up today to get ready to respond. That's exceeding our expectations because people are stepping forward and saying, we need to have this conversation. This is a national crisis. We've got an affordable housing crisis, don't have enough units, and the units that are there are being impeded and disrupted by potential climate and a future of volatility. We are coming to the end of our session, unfortunately, because I think many of us enjoy this. We have 50 questions we haven't even gotten to. I'd like to ask each of you to give us just a sentence on what you want to do. How do we work together to drive this issue and resolve the question of safeguarding our housing around the nation? Who would like to start?
I'd be happy to start. So I think one, it was Renee who mentioned that we all have to have the same data and be on the same page around facts. And so to the extent that we as Fannie Mae can gather all the right facts to have the right discussions, we're open to really being part of, let's get the facts straight. I think secondly, we have to have the real dead horse under the table discussions. And by that, I mean, if we're rebuilding the same community 50 times because it's in the middle of the storm, at some point we got to look at each other and say, what's the total cost? And really, is this the right alternative? And then we got to get our heads together about what do we do about this? So I think part of kind of the go forward is we have to all change our attitude about what's right for us. And part of what's right for us is we need to have some of these conversations that are really ugly to have, but must be had. And then we have to have the courage to do something about our findings. We're going to do our part. Our company is dedicated to really trying to figure out what I call the climate enigma. This is not simple, not easy, whatever, but I think we have no choice but to do something and do something now. But I think we have to start having more factual conversations about where we find ourselves. And then we got to all be willing to act where we can act responsibly.
Yeah, and no, go ahead. So, no, go ahead.
So mine would be, and a lot of it came out through here, is no one sector could address this. Everyone has to be part of the conversation. That includes every level of government. It requires bank regulators, obviously HUD and FEMA. It includes insurance industry. It includes banks, housing. Everyone has to be part of it. So that partnership and coordination is critical. And then I would say that let's always remember it's the people who live there, it's the small businesses, it's the livelihood of those owners. So as we talk about these issues, and they're hard issues, and they're not going away, that we always come back to that, because ultimately it's the safety of people and our neighbor. Jeff, on that note, I really would love that. I think it should be at the center of this whole conversation.
Yeah, and so building on that point, I would simply say we have to embrace the universal humanity of all of God's children. Mm-hmm. And what I mean by that is that all of this is connected. And we can't take care of ourselves without taking care of our neighbors. And I believe if we approach this issue understanding, and this is the thing I learned through my experience with Habitat, all people want the same things. They want great communities, they want safety, they want great education, they want to, celebrate and enjoy, and people fundamentally love each other. And so we just need to take all of that knowledge and understanding and approach these issues in a way that can be equitable, because we can't continue on the path. I mean, I think the social justice issue that is sitting right in front of us has to be solved as we move forward in approaching climate or whatever, because at the end of the day, what is underpinning all of these challenges is that we have not embraced the universal humanity of the issues. And if we approach it from that perspective, and with all of these fabulous organizations that are here and are on this call, I know we can get it done.
I would say that, when you said work together, I think that's the key of federal, state, local, but the community at whole, all of the residents, the small businesses, the schools, the churches, they all need to work together. Change is hard. And, it takes a lot of determination, perseverance, and patience. But we can get there. We need to be more proactive. We need to be having these discussions now, not after disaster. They should just become a normal part of conversations as communities are dealing with these various issues, whatever the issues may be. They need to do that as a normal course of business, not when you're, reacting when, as I said earlier, good decisions aren't normally made when people are reacting. A lot of things get in the way of making good decisions, even though everybody's heart is in the right place. Decisions aren't ultimately always made with the best facts and thoughts. And so I would encourage folks to keep this dialogue alive now. Don't wait for an event when you're having your discussions on development or whatever that may be to the fabric of your community. Have these very challenging discussions that will invoke change and will make things very much more positive for your community at large.
Thank you all for your partnership, for your tremendous vision, and for your commitment to safe housing across the nation. We look forward to working with you all in the coming year. And thank you to our audience from around the world for staying with us and being committed to getting ready to respond. We're excited to follow up with you all. Yes, this will be available afterwards to all of you, and the toolkit is free, and we look forward to working with you all. Thank you all, and have a wonderful and safe holiday season.
Thank you. Thank you, Lori.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you.